dear friend to the university and all universities in the state. We have here with us Lieutenant Governor Brad Little, and Brad Little, as you know, is third generation Idahoan, family that's well known, very successful rancher, but he is most known throughout the state of all of his accomplishments in providing the service to the people of Idaho. He is a great friend to higher education. When you talk with Lieutenant Governor Little about business, about education, about how they're interrelated, about the future, economic development, he's always front and center. And indeed, it is a great honor to have him here at ISU. So, Lieutenant Governor Brad Little.
When I go to one of these events and the university president's got jeans on, I got slacks on, I always feel kind of out of place. But it's great to be here. I found out that the food was free, so the turnout might be a result of Wells Fargo's generosity. I do borrow a little money from Wells Fargo, so I'll thank him for you, Art. But, it's great to be here. I do apologize. I know you understood the Lieutenant Governor was going to be here. He couldn't make it today, and because the governor's here today, because your governor's out of state, so when he's gone, I'm the governor. So I got a promotion this morning, unbeknownst to me. But you know, actually, lieutenant governors are often cast as second and third class citizens, and Win Rockefeller, who was lieutenant governor of Arkansas and then became governor, once I was at an event, and he said that a good lieutenant governor is like your spare tire. You want it out of sight and out of the way, but all pumped up and ready to go at any time. So I try and be a good lieutenant governor in that vein. But let me talk a little bit about my past, where I've been, because that's who I am, where I came from. President Bayless talked about my roots in agriculture and the livestock industry mainly, but also in farming. And you know, one of our oldest industries all over Idaho, from one end to the other, and that's part of who I am. But I spent a lot of time involved, even here in Bannock County, in the business community, business industry. I remember one of my first trips here from a business standpoint was when the Great Western Malding plant was brand new. That'll tell you how long ago it was here. I remember being here when touring the FMC plant, and then when we all saw what happened here in Bannock County when that closed down. But my experience in industry, business and industry and that community has really formed who I am, but it's also the people that I've been around in business from one end of the state to the other. I chaired Idaho Business Week, which is a program that I really miss, where we bring in about 500 high school students from all over the state, and business leaders from all over the state would talk about the principles of free enterprise and the principles of business. And these were students that were going to go on and enroll in colleges like the business college here at ISU. I've had quite a bit of experience in the investment field. I've served on investment committees in philanthropy, the Idaho Community Foundation, at my old alma mater at the University of Idaho, and then I served on the Idaho Endowment Fund Investment Board. So I've seen and overseen portfolios anywhere from $50 million to in excess of $1 billion. And that's been very helpful in my job, making appointments for the governor to these boards and commissions. I served on an Idaho-based bank board for a while. That bank, since I got off of it, has been sold twice and now is no longer managed out of the state of Idaho. It's now managed out of Montana. But today I still serve on the board of a company that we're in advanced manufacturing, and almost all our competition is Chinese. And that gives me a real interesting perspective on world trade, particularly with that part of the world, and what fair trade, free trade, all those issues are. But also, besides being involved in business and industry, was business and industry politics. I was president of the Idaho Wool Growers, chairman of the board of the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, where once again I was very honored to meet with a lot of the be around and do business with a lot of the business leaders in Idaho, including right here. And then as a result of all this, I was asked to get involved in elected politics. I got in the state senate, and then in the senate I was in leadership, and so I've had exposure, obviously, with a lot of people from all over the state there. And then when I became lieutenant governor, our governor has been very generous in allowing me to be part of his cabinet, where I met with all the different agencies about how they could better serve you, the citizens of the state of Idaho. All the meetings with leadership, whether it's minority leadership or minority leadership, I participated in those. And then part of my job description, besides the fact that I preside over the Senate in the Constitution, which I'll do Thursday when we have our hopefully, one-day organizational session, and I do whatever the governor asked me to do. And so I chaired the transportation subcommittee, where we made a recommendation on transportation. Today I currently serve as co-chair of the leadership in nuclear energy, where we have a lot to do with this part of the state as far as the lab. And I also serve as chairman of the governor's cybersecurity task force, which is real important in this day and time, with all the changes that are taking place in that rapidly growing area, which I've talked to several students here today that believe me, there's an incredible demand for people with that kind of expertise going forward. But most importantly, one of the things I've done as your lieutenant governor has been involved in economic development. And here, the Bannock Economic Development people, I remember the dark days here when well, I go back when the Cyrus Erie closed down, but particularly when FMC, and I talk about this all around the state, what happened at that point in time when your community came together and said there are no bad ideas for economic growth here in Bannock County, and you're to be applauded for that. The people that establishment and the people that maintain it today. I've seen the successes here in Bannock County, but full disclosure, I've seen some of the failures, and I'd be glad to talk about that if anybody wants to know. But my political positions reflect my life, business experience, and elected official experience. One of the things that when I was a young cattleman, I was somewhere, and I think a guy from Kansas said at one time, trying to get a bunch of us old fuddy-duddy cattlemen to make changes. He said, you know, change is inevitable. Adaptation and survival are optional. Change is inevitable. Adaptation and survival is optional. And as I've reflected over that over the years, I know it's true in business, because the companies that are always changing, always innovating, those are the ones that have survived and been successful. As an individual, I know people, I've been told that occasionally I'm one, who elect not to change. And they can survive, but they really are, the odds are stacked against them if they want to thrive. But when I look at my new endeavor in government, that's important in that area too. Whether you're a city or a county or a state or even a country, if you don't change, if you don't adapt to change and make those kind of changes, you're giving up the high ground to your competitors, whether it's another community, another state, or even another nation. And that's why I always talk about the necessity of change, even as difficult as it can be, and it's really difficult in politics. You know, if you're in a business, even a small or a larger one, often you got a CEO who can demand that change. But if you're in government where you got to collectively make these decisions, it's much more difficult. So how do you cope with the fundamental reality as yourselves, as an entrepreneur or an employee or a business, is what will shape your future? I got 2 or 3 things that I always say at every commencement speech when I'm talking to high school kids or college students. And that's that first, be a lifelong learner. I come from a generation where my peers, whether it was in high school or college, assumed they were going to have 1, maybe 2 careers in their whole lifetime. Futures today predict that that number is 6. And if you're in the technology field, you know, there's areas in the technology field where it might be a matter of 1 or 2 years on a contract basis, or even instances where it's just a few months. That is such a change in the world over my lifetime about the necessity to continue to learn and sharpen your skills on a continuous basis. Secondly, figure out what your personal competitive advantage is. You may have a degree in X, but it's all those affiliated things. Greg and I were talking on the way down that it's probably not the Facebook stuff, but it might be the LinkedIn stuff. What skills do you have that go along with your degree that are going to be unique to your employers? What is that one thing that you have when you're filling out that resume, which is kind of getting to be passé, that a company needs because of the specialization that exists today? What makes you stand out? And of course, obviously, this has gotten to be more and more of an important issue, is your ability to communicate and work, be part of a team. I can't tell you, particularly in larger businesses, how that's gotten to be much more in demand, that teamwork aspect of particularly in the business community, because of the complexity of the world. Your ability to work in a team and be part of it to overcome these great big problems that exist in the technological world we have today. And but finally, a piece of advice that I heard at a commencement speech one time, and I'd done it, but I hadn't waited as much on it as I should have, and that's select and find a mentor or mentors. For me, whether it was in agriculture, whether it was in business, or whether it was in politics, there's in some instances 1 or 2, but in some instances many that served as a mentor to me. One of mine, who was a good friend of mine from right over here, was Park Price. Park and I served on the Idaho Community Foundation board together, the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry board together, and Park always had a very visionary view of Idaho, of business, of what we need to do in financing. He was a business person here in Pocatello. He was obviously a bank chairman over the other end of the valley, and he's been very visionary in education. They do a lot of the heavy lifting for you if you have a mentor. Obviously in politics, my dad, Jim McClure, Phil Batt, those were all people that when I come to a fork in the road about making a decision, if it was about politics, I'd think, what would Dad, what would Jim McClure, what would Phil Batt do? When I come to policy on education from a business standpoint, I think about what Park Price would do. Finding those mentors, spending time around them, there's hardly anybody out there that's been successful that if you ask them, won't give you some of that personal advice you need going forward. I think today, given what's taken place in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we all know that times there's going to be a lot of change coming forward, and they're going to be challenging. But to me, I'm incredibly optimistic about our country. I'm very optimistic about our state because of where we are, what we've done in the past, where we're going, and I'm optimistic about business. I want Idaho to be the best possible place to live. Not a good place, but the best place. I want it to be a great place to work, and whatever we can do to make the atmosphere for business better, we're all in. But most importantly, I want it to be a great place to raise a family, because if it's a great place to raise a family, you students that told me that you were going to leave to go to Seattle or wherever else, we want you to come back to Idaho, and we're going to do all we can to keep building the great state of Idaho. So you may go off and go somewhere else, but we want you to come back to be a part of our state and our community. Art, with that, thank you very much, and I think I've got time left for questions, don't I?
Yes, you do.
All right, here we go. There are no there are no questions that are out of bounds as far as I'm concerned. So, Jim?
If the governor's out of state, is he in New York or Washington, D.C. by any chance?
He's in Washington, but I know why he's there. We actually had this new Congress, the sage grouse issue, which affects power line establishment, mining, agriculture. We thought we had a path forward on sage grouse, and last week we had a little problem. So we had a meeting. I know he's going back to address that, but he might be having some other meetings, and I'm not privy to that part of it. I can tell you about the sage grouse. Yes.
I think a lot of students have the mentality of just doing it on their own. And it's a mentality that we kind of carry into adulthood. So we're adults now, but as we grow older. But the idea of getting a mentor sounds good. How do you go about getting a mentor or looking? What would you say?
Most people that have been really successful, I know a few of them that don't fall into this category, but most people that have been really successful are more than glad to share that, because people have been successful in, like I said, any of these fields, all subscribe to some point or another in the rising tide floats all ships. So my experience at Idaho Business Week was incredible. Every Sunday night, Jack Simplot would come down and tell those kids from Declo that showed up there about what they needed to do. And Larry Kistler that founded Norco, and these people, right down to their core, they believe, and Idaho might be a little unique in this aspect compared to some of the more urban states, that anything they can do to help particularly young people survive and thrive is going to be to the benefit of the whole state. I can't tell you how important it is where John or I are doing economic development, we have somebody come into the state, they want to see that positive attitude about getting things done, and people that have been successful, whether they be in education, whether they be in politics, whether they be in business, they want the people coming behind them to be successful also. So you don't have to occupy all their time, but if you sit down and ask them some questions, but follow what they do, see what their business decisions are. There's obviously some business decisions that are esoteric in nature, but only for a brief period of time. It's most successful people, it's in their DNA to be that mentor to someone.
Yeah.
Yes?
Hi. From the perspective of the governor's office, what do you see as some of the best practices around the state for economic development? Are there programs in this little town or that little town that you've seen that really work well?
Well, I talk about Bannock County all the time, and I touched on it lightly. In so many of these areas, I think that's vibrating right next to my microphone. That's actually a business person that I know has a problem that he wants me to address, because he calls me about every 2 days about it. But generally, what's the most important thing is that there be one-stop shop for an existing business that wants to grow or a new business that wants to come in, so that the county commissioners and the mayor, well, I'll give you a good example. We were here, the governor and I were at the airport, here at the Pocatello airport, when we were hustling Allstate to move into here. And I remember when the mayor from Chubbuck and Pocatello say, we don't care where you put it, wherever you put it, we'll support you. And the look on the decision makers and also on the gatekeepers who were there was amazing, because what they don't want to hear is, well, that's the highway department, or that's the county, or that's planning and zoning. They want to know, I equate it to a personal, either a small bank or a large bank where they have personal banking, where there's one person where you don't have to call up a number and press 1 and press 4 and be on hold. There's one person that answers all your questions. Good economic development is like a personal banker or your hometown banker that takes care of your credit card and everything else. That, time is money to a business. And if you say, well, You know, you gotta go over to planning and zoning, and then you gotta go to the highway department or the city road department. That is friction for a business where time is money. And one of the lines that I heard from the chief financial officer at Chobani when we were doing that is speed matters. Amy's Kitchen, here's a great example. You know, that I remember the discussion with them. Their internal rate of return on their growth was 10% because they were limited by their production. They figured buying this plant right out here, that by purchasing this plant, their profit margin would go up by, I think they said that at the groundbreaking, didn't they, John? And time is money, and so facilitating economic development to where they say, we gotta have people trained. Can ISU through their technical school, can they do some of this training? Can the school district take some of these high school kids and give them some of the skills they need to run the equipment in the plant? But they just want the minimum number of point of contacts to where that's taken care of. That's why people call me all the time if they're having problems with the state agency, and they think mistakenly that the lieutenant governor matters. But that's the most important lesson I know on economic development. You gotta have more questions than that. Yes?
So what are your hopes for the legislative session this year? We got some time, so.
Well, I mean, obviously the top of the, you know, we spend 64% of the money on education, 50% of it on K-12, and another 15-20% on higher ed and career professional. This is the third year of the implementation of the task force recommendation, which is career ladder, which is in essence funding for teachers to get back from what happened when we slowed things down. You know, that's a pretty big item. That's about a $50 million item. I don't see any, actually I don't see any impediments to getting that done. I know what repeal means as far as the Affordable Care Act. I have no idea what replace means. You know, what the ramifications are gonna have on the healthcare industry, on our Medicaid, on the whole, what's gonna happen there. And I don't know whether we'll know that in the first month of the legislature. The first month they spend all their time doing rules review. But that's gonna be a big factor. I bet I've read 20 articles on what replace means, and the delta between all of them is incredible. The change, what it's going to mean. I predicted, I think, up the North Idaho Chamber Tour, that they would repeal it, but they'd repeal it with an implementation rate, the date that's, you know, 12, 18 months out, so they can kind of figure out what they're going to do. So everything would stay the same. The law would go off effective such and such date, and then they, you know, if I was king and they wanted me to do it, I'd say, well, you can't just, it's such a complex, huge animal that just repealing it without having something to replace it. I mean, people's expectations have changed dramatically since some expectations are higher and some are lower, but it's got to be addressed. I think that's going to be a big item. What's the president's tax and Congress's tax proposal going to be? We always in Idaho, you accountings, how many of you are accounting students? Well, it's good for your business if Idaho makes you file a totally separate tax return, but we don't like to do that in Idaho. We like to have total conformity so that when you do for your clients, whether they be a business or an individual, so that when you fill out their federal form, which you have to fill out, the state form is similar to that. If they change in a big way how tax is collected, we don't know what impact that'll be to our general fund and to everything else. That's another uncertainty. They're talking about a big infrastructure, you know, a huge infrastructure plan, but we don't know what the ramifications and how they're going to pay for that. That's going to make some other differences. So I think sticking to our knitting, doing our education, and Art and I talked about what's, you know, some of the proposals the state board has on higher education. that's going to go forward, but really, the uncertainty of what Congress and the new administration are going to do is probably going to occupy a lot of time. Yes?
So economic development has many components, but you've alluded to education. How do you take Idaho from the bottom of the pile?
Well, the bottom of, when you say bottom of the pile, you're referring to per student funding. Well, obviously, we're going to make the last 2 years we've increased funding above everything else by 7.5%, so 15% in the last 2 years. We're getting ready to make another big investment in it. We want to resolve the funding issue, but simultaneously we're always trying to make the delivery of that product, which comes out in these students that enroll here at ISU, that we have those kids ready for their career or ready for higher education when they graduate and come across the stage. The problem with investments in K-12 is it takes a long time. When you make investments in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, so that all the kids are reading proficiently by the end of the third grade, you don't get a return on that. You probably do in high school because you don't have that drag on the classroom with those kids that can't read. So you get some of the return, but the real return is when you get those people out into the workforce. And believe me, everywhere I go doing economic development work, it is all about we got to have more skills. And it's not that we don't have skilled people here. It's the fact that the economy is changing so fast. My industry of agriculture, the timber industry, the mining industry, the ordinary manufacturing, the changes that have taken place there is the enormity of it and the skills that these kids have to have. So education's the key. That's why we spend 65% of our money. And I'm sure that's not going to change going forward. And we just want to do it as efficiently as we can. The fact that we've got a long-term plan that's got, we got 90-some% of the legislature that voted for those big increases in funding, and there's 10% of the legislature that votes against everything. So it's unanimous. I thought somebody'd get that. But I mean, that's really amazing. And the governor's got a proposal for a new higher ed task force to talk about, along with the state board, to talk about, more out-year plans where we don't have President Bayless and I were talking about a minute ago, this is the flavor of the month new higher ed or public ed initiative that, may last for a year or two in an appropriation bill and then go away, which drives these college presidents and their administration crazy. But I think all that's a part of getting us back up there. Some of the things we're doing in the reading area, we've got a new reading initiative that's being implemented. We've seen pretty good migration in our math scores. I'm still very frustrated by our go-on rate, but I've spent quite a bit of time looking at it. I think it's a little bit of an anomaly. The direct admissions program that we've got now is adding some volume to that, but a lot of it is we have to do this as community leaders in our communities where we convince the students and their parents how important education is. I'm a student of pre-K and I've looked at it, but in states where they've implemented pre-K to where educational attainment wasn't a big priority, you see kids in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade that are ahead of where they were before, but if their parents and society doesn't tell them how important education is, you start losing some of that benefit. So, my message as a business development person is I know very few companies that say, what we need is more unskilled labor. Our goal is 60%. 40% is way more than what we need anyway, is our ability to provide. I was at a dairy the other day, they installed robots, wiped out 45% of their health in 3 days. I know how many guys it used to take to put up a ton of hay on a farm compared to what it is today, and how many people in this part of Idaho and in my part of Idaho it used to take to irrigate 160 acres of alfalfa compared to today. But that's the same instance in mining, in timber, in manufacturing, and even in the service industry. And so if we don't, we're in this race, when I talk about being competitive, we're in this race of having the skilled workforce to where those companies that come and see John and I and Matt and all the economic development people know that they'll have the workforce. You know, Burley's a funny place. I meet with those guys, says, I don't want one more company in here, hiring away my help. And then that guy's boss's boss says, we're going to expand our Burley plant because we get so much production out of it. I said, what do you do about your labor problem? He says, oh, that's the plant manager's problem, that's not mine. But you know, what we have in Idaho is a culture, and these businesses talk about it all the time. It says, you know, they may not be the best skilled, but they're willing to learn and willing to go on. And we were talking about that earlier, that we've got to have more opportunities for these kids in high school to have some kind of work experience, and obviously at the college level, because most employers, just the degree isn't adequate enough for them. They want some work experience. They know that when they make that investment in that student right from the get-go, that they've got some of those others, particularly the soft skills, that are necessary for them to go forward. But it's everything. Education's everything. So it's the only, you know, we've got some water issues in the state that we'll address usually when we have to, but we're still ahead of a lot of other states. We've got the most affordable energy. We've got a great place to live, work. What we got to do is continue on that skill set. Yes?
I know you mentioned several things that you always mention at different presentations you do. Is there something that you've learned, whether it's in business or your personal life or any aspect of your life, that is a lesson that you would want us to know?
Telling no to your friends is always better earlier than it is later. Because that's what the governor and I get to do, is tell our friends no. Telling your enemies no is easy. But telling your friends no earlier, you know, oh, I don't want to break that news to Joe or Sally or whoever it is. You know, if, you know, being able to say, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but here's some of the issues that we have to, you know, some of those things that I've delayed because, you know, and a lot of times it's total strangers, you know, but it's not like wine. It doesn't get better with time, that bad news. It's something that you need to do, you know, be straight, and people will appreciate the fact if you're straight with them. Instincts are important, particularly in economic development. You know, if something sounds too good to be true, you want to, and I get this in the economic development field when they'll say, XYZ company, you know, Boeing's going to move their plant to Murtaugh. Okay. You know, and people would come out and say, Boeing's moving to Murtaugh. I made that up, but there was another community in Idaho where that was the case. And you know, you got to say, direct them to somebody that says, that's probably an impossibility, because there's so many other things that we need to do if you get, and sometimes big things happen. But having an instinct about, you know, and you need to listen to them enough to say, yeah, this is a real possibility. But there gets to be a point in time we say that's never going to happen. Oh, Matt's saying Boeing is moving to Murtaugh.
No, I was going to ask you about a Siphon Road interchange off 15, but we're not out of time, so you might get out of that one.
Well, of course, I mean that, you know, any kind of a highway project. You know, my leadership on the Governor's Task Force on Transportation, fixing bridges is very unsexy. Everybody likes a new curb cut, everybody likes a new lane on the road, but we have too many bridges in Idaho that were engineered to last 50 or 60 years that right now have to last 100 or 120 years. We have got to dedicate, I mean, you could kick that can down the road, but it's really gonna, you know, you read about the infrastructure problems all over the United States. Those projects that impinge on our ability to do the bridge work, particularly just look at all the canals in this part of the state. Look at how many of these counties have got all these canals that their bridges are about the end of their useful life. We have got to address that part. You know, I supported Garvey. I wanted us to pay for it. And I supported the last transportation plan, and I think our delivery on both the local basis and the state level of transportation, maintenance, and construction is more efficient than it used to be, and you've got to continue to do that. That's that adaptation to change aspect. But you know, big projects, we've got a process in the state where the State Transportation Board prioritizes them, and it's always, you know, should be by. But I will tell you one thing, they did just recently implement an economic, you know, it used to be safety first always, and then some of the maintenance, but they dedicated part of theirs to kind of more situational economic development, and that might fall into that category now. Okay, Greg says I'm all done. Thank you very much.
Okay, how nice is it to have the governor in the house today? Governor, thank you so much for being here, and we have a small token of our appreciation. One for you and one for Greg.
Well, Greg did a lot of the work.
Yeah,
He drove down here this morning, so.
In
That's right.
So, thank you, Jim.
You bet. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you to all the community members, the students, faculty, staff that came out. We really appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you again in the spring. Have a great day.